5 relatives to avoid after 60. I want to talk to you today about an issue many of us face, but rarely acknowledge. There are certain relatives who can take a serious toll on our well-being as we get older. We all dream of a peaceful and fulfilling life once we reach our 60s, but not everyone around us is on the same page. Sometimes, the very people who share our bloodline can disrupt our emotional health, our finances, and our sense of independence. In this conversation, I'm going to share insights on 5 categories of relatives we might need to keep at arm's length after 60. The last one often surprises people because it's camouflaged as helpfulness. I also want to illustrate each type with a real-life story, something that either I have experienced or someone close to me has. By doing so, I hope it clarifies why we need to protect ourselves and how we can do so kindly and wisely. 1. The drama and guilt relative. Let's begin with the kind of relative who lives and breathes drama. They are the ones who may start off a simple family gathering by bringing up a minor inconvenience, maybe a neighbor parked in front of their mailbox, and spinning it into an epic saga. One older woman I know, whom I'll call Gloria, spoke of her niece, who thrived on chaos. Every time Gloria visited her, she found herself in the middle of a storm, hearing about feuds with friends, tension at work, or wild accusations that seemed greatly exaggerated. At first, Gloria tried to be supportive, offering gentle advice. But eventually, she realized that her niece was seeking not solutions, but emotional turmoil, as though a life without conflict was simply too quiet. This constant swirl of negativity pulled Gloria in and left her feeling tense whenever she left. She'd notice her blood pressure creeping up, her anxiety levels increasing, and her overall sense of calm slipping away. When Gloria spoke with her doctor about stress management, it dawned on her that she had the right to say no to these relentless dramas. By the time we're in our 60s, we need to safeguard our emotional energy. If we're forced to ride an endless roller coaster of conflicts and catastrophes that have nothing to do with us, that can push us to burnout. Setting boundaries doesn't mean shutting this relative out entirely, unless the situation truly calls for it. It often means limiting the frequency of these interactions or respectfully redirecting their dramatic calls. You might say, "I'm sorry you're going through this. I hope things get better soon." And then exit the conversation. Respectful distance can be a lifesaver. After all, time is precious, and so is your mental and physical health. 2. The money leech relative. Continuing on, there's another family dynamic that can be just as draining, this time on our wallets as well as our emotions. I'm referring to the person who always needs money. An old neighbor I had, Mr. Clarence, discovered this the hard way. Mr. Clarence was retired, living off a modest pension. He'd worked for decades in a local manufacturing plant. He wasn't wealthy, but he had saved responsibly. Over the course of a year, however, he started receiving frequent calls from a distant nephew with countless emergencies. A car that broke down, overdue rent, and unexpected hospital bills. Mr. Clarence had a big heart and deeply believed in helping family whenever possible. So at first, he willingly handed over some cash to keep his nephew afloat. But it didn't stop there. The nephew returned again and again, each time with a more dramatic excuse. And each time, the amount requested grew larger. When Mr. Clarence hinted that he was concerned about his own budget, the nephew suggested he could always sell a few items or take out a small loan. The nerve of that suggestion shocked Mr. Clarence. He felt used, but also guilty. After all, this nephew was family. It took a health scare to make Mr. Clarence realize he couldn't carry the weight of someone else's repeated mistakes any longer. He found the courage to politely but firmly refuse further financial support, suggesting his nephew seek professional advice or alternative resources. It wasn't easy, but it was a vital step in safeguarding his retirement. That's an important note. The money you've earned or saved over a lifetime is meant to support you, especially in the years when you can finally relax. Be watchful of those who try to tap into your finances with a sense of entitlement. Setting a clear boundary by saying, "I'm sorry, I can't help you this time," is not cruel. It's self-preservation and acknowledges the reality of your own financial limits. 3. The always right relative. Another friend of mine, Susan, encountered a different type of challenge. A relative who knew everything, or at least believed they did. Susan's older cousin was convinced that he was an expert on every subject, from medical issues to the choice of retirement homes. When Susan debated whether to move to a warmer climate for health reasons, her cousin scolded her for even considering it. "You'll be back in 6 months," he declared, "because you won't survive the humidity." Every little decision Susan made was harshly critiqued. When she chose a particular investment strategy, he told her she was making a mistake. If she went on a cruise, he'd roll his eyes as though she were wasting her money. The constant judgments took a toll on Susan's confidence. She started hesitating to make decisions at all, dreading that phone call where he'd try to overrule her. Finally, after losing sleep over yet another one of his warnings, she decided enough was enough. She recognized that his constant need to be right was an outgrowth of his own insecurities, not a reflection of her sound judgment. Susan began phrasing her responses with calm finality. "I hear what you're saying, but this is my life, and I've made my choice." The big step was understanding that she didn't owe him a justification. This is a crucial lesson. You can listen politely to family members and still stand firm. You don't need to argue or prove them wrong. A simple, "I've considered my options and feel good about my path," is more than enough. After 60, the time for living on someone else's terms is over. It's a stage where your decisions should honor your own needs and aspirations, and it's perfectly fine to maintain some distance from people who constantly undermine your self-assurance. 4. The perfect image relative. A different kind of pressure, and I've personally felt this one in my own family, comes from relatives who project an image of absolute perfection. It might be that cousin who always appears in immaculate clothes, with flawlessly behaved grandchildren and a vacation home that looks like it belongs in a magazine. She posts pictures on social media that suggest her world is a never-ending celebration of achievements, from the perfect dinner party to the ultimate retirement hobbies. My aunt, who is in her late 60s, used to quietly compare herself to a niece like that. This niece boasted about her philanthropic endeavors, her children's sky-high salaries, and her endless supply of elegant outfits. Every time my aunt scrolled through social media, she felt just a little bit less than. Over time, that comparison game soured my aunt's outlook. She started feeling as though she hadn't done enough with her life, as though her modest home and simpler joys were somehow inferior. However, a chance visit revealed that the niece's perfect life had cracks. There was tension in her marriage, her children struggled with personal issues, and her finances were far from stable. The glitzy exterior was a highlight reel, not the whole picture. Realizing this changed my aunt's perspective, allowing her to shrug off the comparisons. She began focusing on her own happiness, enjoying her garden, her volunteer work at a local pet shelter, and her weekly coffee group. This was the definition of freedom for her. We should all remember that no one's life is ever entirely flawless. So if someone constantly paints that picture, it can be healthy to distance ourselves or, at the very least, remind ourselves that it's often a facade. When you're in your golden years, The last thing you need is an unnecessary inferiority complex triggered by someone else's curated self-promotion. 5. The toxic caretaker relative. The fifth type is perhaps the most surprising of all. The relative who poses as a caretaker, someone who genuinely appears to have your best interests at heart, yet ends up being toxic in their approach. A woman I've known for many years, Mary, confided that her adult daughter often treated her like a helpless child. Mary is fully capable, still drives her own car, cooks her favorite meals, and keeps her mind sharp with puzzles and reading. But her daughter insisted on micromanaging every part of her life: where she would shop, how she would manage her bank account, even which outings were too risky. At first, Mary saw this as concern and appreciated the thoughtfulness. As time went by, though, the daughter took over scheduling Mary's doctor appointments without consulting her, changed her medication routines, and started telling Mary's friends she was too tired for visits. By the time Mary realized what was happening, she felt cut off from her usual circle, uncertain about her own independence, and even a little helpless. The daughter was so intrusive that Mary felt as though her sense of self was slipping away. However, Mary's turning point arrived when a neighbor asked her why she never joined the weekly knitting group anymore. Mary explained that her daughter had told everyone she was no longer interested. In that moment, Mary recognized she'd been slowly but surely losing her autonomy. She confronted her daughter, gently but firmly, explaining that while she appreciated the care, she was still an adult capable of making her own choices. If she needed extra help, she would ask. Mary then regained control over her schedule and finances. She remained civil and kind. After all, she knew her daughter wasn't malicious, just overbearing. But Mary made it clear that healthy boundaries protect emotional well-being. This example is a reminder that not all toxic caretakers set out to be harmful. Sometimes they might truly believe they're doing what's best, but their behavior still becomes stifling. Especially in our 60s and beyond, reclaiming personal independence is critical for emotional health. If a relative's help starts feeling more like domination, it might be time to look for a different support system or professional assistance that respects your rights and dignity. In all these scenarios, whether it's the relative who baits you into drama, the one who siphons your hard-earned money, the perpetually right cousin, the family member radiating so-called perfection, or the well-meaning caretaker who takes control, one message rings loud and clear: your peace of mind is worth protecting. Life is simply too short to spend it locked in battles that drain your spirit. By the time we enter our 60s, 70s, and beyond, we've likely faced enough challenges. We deserve the chance to enjoy the fruits of our labor, our families, and our own personal growth in a more serene environment. But how do we set boundaries without feeling like we're cruel or losing precious connections? The key is balance and honest communication. Politely but firmly stating, "I value our relationship, but these moments of conflict or control are harming me more than helping me," can open a doorway to healthier interactions. Some relatives might be open to adjusting their behavior once they realize how it impacts you. Others might never change. In those cases, reducing contact or modifying how you engage with them might be the healthiest path forward. Above all, I encourage you to have these conversations with empathy, recognizing that we all come from different backgrounds and experiences. Each relative might be battling their own insecurities or simply mirroring the behaviors they grew up with. And we can still care about them without letting them run our lives. For instance, you could say, "I'm here for you, but I can't always fix your problems." Or, "I appreciate your concern, but I'm comfortable making this decision for myself." A sense of love and firmness can coexist. It's also crucial to talk with friends or mental health professionals if you feel overwhelmed by guilt or confusion. Support groups can be invaluable, especially for older adults who need reassurance that they're not alone in facing family complications. When people ask me, should I feel bad about avoiding certain relatives? I often respond, think about whether they respect your well-being, autonomy, and emotional health. If the relationship repeatedly crosses your boundaries and leaves you feeling mentally exhausted, taking a step back may be the best form of self-care. We have permission, at any age, to prioritize our happiness and mental health. There's no universal template dictating that all family ties must remain equally close forever. Lives change, people change, and our obligations shift over time. You're allowed to evolve too. Looking back on all these stories, from Gloria's drama-filled niece to Mr. Clarence's insatiable nephew, Susan's all-knowing cousin, my aunt's perfect image niece, and Mary's overbearing caretaker daughter, I see one fundamental truth. A healthy family relationship fosters support, love, and understanding, not relentless chaos, financial exploitation, or manipulated dependency. Everyone deserves connections that uplift rather than deplete. We all deserve to wake up feeling secure in our choices, confident in our independence, and hopeful for the future. That optimism can be realized by identifying unhealthy patterns and gently but decidedly removing them from our daily routine. I hope this discussion strikes a chord with you and perhaps offers some comforting reassurance that it is not selfish to prioritize your well-being. Maybe you, too, have recognized a pattern in a relative that leaves you anxious or uncertain. Maybe you've always wondered if you were alone in feeling manipulated or drained by family expectations. I promise you, you're not alone. This is more common than we often admit. By sharing these real-life experiences and talking openly about them, we can break a cycle of silence. We can encourage each other to create and nurture family bonds that are genuinely caring and mutually beneficial, while simultaneously stepping away from those that persistently inflict harm. If any of these stories resonate with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Perhaps you've found a healthy way to redefine your role in these tricky family relationships. Maybe you have additional tips for others who are struggling to set limits. Feel free to share in the comments section or discuss it with friends, because conversation is how we learn, grow, and realize that better boundaries lead to better lives. Let's open up and let one another know that facing family drama doesn't mean we have to submit to it. It means we become more mindful, empathetic, and protective of the beautiful life we've worked so hard to build. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you walk away with a deeper understanding of how certain relationships can shape or shake our later years. May your journey be filled with supportive, kind-hearted people who truly have your best interests at heart. And may you find the courage to distance yourself, when needed, from those who do not. Your retirement and beyond can be a beautiful chapter, filled with newfound freedoms, joys, and passions. Guard it well, and remember, sometimes saying no to the wrong situations is precisely what allows us to say yes to everything wonderful waiting just around the corner. Take good care, stay strong, and I look forward to hearing your stories and suggestions. Let's keep this dialogue going so we can inspire each other to cultivate the relationships that bring out the best in all of us.